Let's talk today about identity. Whenever Dead by Daylight adds a new killer or survivor, identity is one of the most important things, if not the single most important thing, the designers need to express to players. Killers obviously need it the most. It's hard to sum up your killer with a little "the" epithet you can put on a poster if their identity is messy or unclear. But that doesn't mean that identity isn't important to survivors too. Almost all survivors in this game have a clear identity that can be expressed in a couple of words. It might not be their whole story, but it'll be enough for you to be able to identify with them on a basic level, or give you a general sense of what the character is like. Zarina Kassir, for example, is a plucky documentarian. Felix Richter is a visionary architect. Dwight Fairfield is a nervous leader, and I promise, I'm not just reading these off the wiki. But what happens when the identity of a survivor cannot be expressed so easily? The new survivor, Orela Rose, is here on the PTB right now, and there's a lot going on with her that makes her identity hard to pin down, because she's several different things at once. She's an EMT, a horror aficionado, a cafe owner, and she's DBD's first canonically trans original character too. And with all these ideas and identities, they end up blending together into a genuinely unique mix. But without a killer coming alongside her in the steady pulse release, Orela has to stand on her own, unlike most survivors that came before, and that puts a spotlight firmly on her. Something not helped by being a solo original survivor jammed between two massive licensed releases. When writing and designing Orela, Behaviour made a truly ambitious attempt at an original survivor by choosing to depart from their normal rubric when it comes to character identity. But that just begs the question, what does this refreshingly realistic take on storytelling actually contain, and how well did they pull this off? Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, the newest survivor, Orela Rose, coming to DBD in the Steady Pulse half chapter very, very soon. Orela Rose grew up with her parents in Chicago, near the edge of Lake Michigan, which was a massive mindfuck for me because I didn't realise that just because she was near Lake Michigan, that didn't mean she was actually living in Michigan. That realisation broke my brain way harder than it should have done. She went to university in Canada where she met Emily, a close friend who supported her during her transition, and the two rapidly connected, becoming all but inseparable. The two shared a love of horror media, especially the old podcast All Things Wicked This Night, that was recorded by none other than Sable Ward. Sable's podcast discussed the works of Cliff Barra and Alex DeMauro, who aren't too important to the story as people, but we will be talking about them later for sure. For now, all you need to know is that their work inspired Orela and Emily to pursue a dream together. They loved the idea of themed restaurants and met through their shared restaurant management classes at university. So they resolved to one day open a horror-themed dining experience based on the works of Barra, DeMauro and others. But the two set right to the task, and before long they were putting the groundwork together for the Haunted Madhouse of Doom, a haunted house experience for the students of Lakehead University based on one of Cliff Barra's stories. Emily was a scare actor in the experience, strapped to a table where the guests would take turns fake electrocuting her with smoke effects and a hearty dose of screaming to bring the effect of electroshock torture to life, until a damaged wire made the horror a little too real. Electricity coursed through Emily's body and Orela was powerless to save her, Emily's life slipping away on the table in front of her. She didn't even last until emergency services arrived. Orela felt powerless, defeated and painfully alone. The dream Emily and her had had together was as gone as Emily herself was. But Orela found a new purpose, training to become an EMT so she would never feel that powerless again, and could dedicate her life to helping others just like her parents did. She took to this like a duck to water, and became fully trained and in her element in no time. But that dream of the horror-themed restaurant with Emily never quite left her behind completely. John Kingsley was a fantastically wealthy man who wound up in a car crash. Orela assassinated him, bringing him back from the brink of death, and when he recovered, he made his gratitude to her abundantly clear. He would help her get her themed restaurant off the ground and finally bring her and Emily's dream to life. And thus opened Screams in the Dark, a once-a-month horror dining experience that became the talk of the town among horror lovers. Orela balanced running the restaurant with her day job working, She found great satisfaction as an EMT, and didn't want to stop as long as there were still people who she could help. Time passed, and the new theme for the month was one of Barra's stories about a mysterious fog that dragged its victims into an otherworldly land. The story itself was said to be cursed and vanishes readers away into the dark, but Orela wasn't scared. It's just a story, right? But that night, the fog did come for her, and she heard screams and cries from within, noises that were all too familiar. Following Emily's pleas for help, Orela ran into the fog almost without thinking, and thus the entity claimed Orela Rose for its own. So yeah, there is a lot of story here. One of the biggest word counts you've had for a survivor by my guesstimations. So let's start with the first impressions I was left with once I got through it. Straight up, I was quite surprised, because without reading the lore, the initial impression of the character is that she's just EMT girl. Her perks are all themed around medicine or crisis management, the release is called Steady Pulse, and the original art for her that announced her arrival has her hanging out the back of an ambulance. So, when it came time to read the lore, it surprised me how much more there was to her than that. Much of her story covers her time before ever becoming an EMT, and a consistent undercurrent is her love of horror stories and desire to open that horror-themed restaurant. There are multiple different elements that are given plenty of time separately and organically tied together in a way that feels cohesive. The death of her would-be business partner in her horror restaurant dream drives her to become an EMT, and her work saving lives pushes her back into that dream that the two shared together. It's only once she gets them both in balance that she feels truly stable as a character, and that's a refreshing angle to take. A lot of survivors have lofty dreams and aspirations that eventually come to define them completely. Zarina became a documentarian, Felix became an architect, Jane became a showbiz star. They're all people who broadly get what they want, and achieve great things off the back of that wind up consuming their entire lives as they become defined by their ambitions. Orela gets her dream too, but it's handled completely differently. The journey to Screams from the Dark is a rocky one, and where she finally ends up is very different from the vision she and Emily started out with. It's a pretty mature take on a story we've heard dozens of times before. Many of the people who achieve their dreams or ambitions in life don't tend to get them the way they originally planned, but that doesn't make the achievement any less impressive. And it's nice to have a character whose work means a lot to them, but also wasn't their first choice for a career either. So many characters in this game end up doing the first thing they set their mind to, and that's a trait that's very common in fiction, where the protagonist has some sort of calling from a young age, where they could never really have done anything else. But the real world is rarely so simple, and the lives we lead can shape us in all sorts of different ways, make us realise things about ourselves that we'd never have anticipated. And Orela's story earns that level of development too. Every event ties itself to every other event, so nothing feels disjointed or like it was shoehorned in to make a point. Her relationship with Emily is the driving factor behind everything. Their meeting spot in the city gives them the idea for the themed restaurant. They build the haunted house experience together, and she even helps with Orela's transition, both in the lore itself and the complete descriptions that accompany it. In every way that matters, Emily helped Orela find out who she is, which makes Emily's death genuinely gut-wrenching, because you find yourself asking, how is Orela going to carry on without her? And the answer is not exactly obvious, at least if you're not an omniscient reader who already knows she'll become an EMT. What I'm really trying to say here is that Orela's a very multi-dimensional character by DVD standards, but what makes that impressive is that none of that comes at the cost of story coherency. Everything's fluid and fits together like a jigsaw puzzle, and it gives the whole story a sense of realism. And I don't mean the kind of gritty, fatalistic nihilism that is often called realism, where nothing good ever happens because life's just so miserable, because life ain't always like that. Life's a mixture of good and terrible things that happen to people who do or don't deserve them, and Orela's lore is a wonderfully bittersweet reminder of that. Emily didn't deserve to die on that table in the haunted madhouse of doom, and Orela didn't deserve to lose her best friend to what was ultimately just dumb luck. But it set her on the path to be the EMT she is today. All the people who she has saved since then are still alive today because of what happened to Emily and the path that set Orela on. And it was that same dumb luck that took Emily away that caused Orela to save the life of a billionaire who was able to help her achieve her dream. DBD's world is melodramatic, tropey, and campy at times, so it's nice to have a more grounded, realistic, and well-composed story about a character you can really care about. And between the deluge of licensed characters and the heavy entity lore connections or black veil bullshit of our originals over the past couple of years, it's nice to have a tender and relatively low-stakes story once in a while. It reminds me a lot of the paired stories of Talita and Hanato, the sister and brother team-up of the Tools of Torment chapter. Their story felt much like the survivors of old. They weren't pieces in a grand conspiracy of eldritch horrors and murder cults, they were two people trying to live their lives and make their way in the world. But it's that simple relatability that makes both of them, and especially Hanato, feel like such nice, almost cozy reading. Orela recaptures that again on some level, proving that a story doesn't need deep entity connections to be worth your time. It just has to be a character you can care about. That's not to say that these wider connections aren't present in the story though, they're definitely there. They're just not necessary to enjoy Orela's lore. The reactions I was seeing when Cliff Barra got mentioned in that first teaser for her, and I told Twitter who he was, it made me feel young again, it really did. Because the two inspirations behind Orela and Emily's dream, Cliff Barra and Alex DeMauro, are not characters invented for her story. They've both been figures in the Observer sections of the tomes before for quite some time now, debuting in Tome 10's Observer story Things in the Fog. In the story Chamber of Blood, Deja Vuism, Cliff Barra is a well-established horror screenwriter who met the love of his life, art director Alex DeMauro, on the set of a film they're working on together. The two made groundbreaking new pictures as a power couple of horror cinema until a cloud of black fog swallowed Alex right in the middle of a shoot. Cliff was heartbroken and confused, losing himself completely after the inexplicable vanishing of the man he loved, until the fog revealed a gateway to another world where he heard Alex's screams from inside. Just like Orela, he didn't hesitate to enter. In the entity's realm, Cliff wandered past decrepit castles and ruins in search of Alex, and found him being brutally tortured, but the entity got to them both before he could get them out. The story ends with Cliff taking Alex's place as a tortured victim and turned into a killer, while Alex himself is taken to the campfire, inducted as a new survivor to the trials, and possibly got a toolbox named after him. It's genuinely a great story, probably the best bit of Tome 10, and if you know the story, then Orela's lore takes it on a whole new light. Her relationship with Emily mirrors Cliff's relationship with Alex. They were brought together by a mutual passion project, and became two peas in a pod that lost each other to a great tragedy. And their stories end by one of them entering the fog willingly, because they hear the screams and cries of the one they love. It's a really solid parallel that I know shippers are going to go nuts with, but even without that parallel, it's nice to see the tomes acknowledged as a core part of Orela's lore, and it helps sew her into DBD's canon like she was always a part of it. There's a great balance here. Knowing who she is doesn't demand that you read the Barra and DeMauro story, but it's a nice bonus for lore heads like me. Sable's inclusion as the presenter of the All Things Wicked This Night podcast is another little garnish to remind us this is still the DBD universe. It's not core to understanding Orela as a character, but it's nice to see Sable given a bit more to do. It's honestly quite funny to me how she's written into Orela's backstory with more care than she was ever written into Michaela's. We never even knew that her podcast was called All Things Wicked This Night until Orela's lore told us that, and I just can't get over the fact that Orela confirmed Sable's podcast having merch now. That's just so funny to me. So yeah, there's a lot to learn about Orela Rose. She's got more stuff going on than most original survivors do, at least before tomes start getting involved. And I would comfortably say she's got my favourite new survivor lore in years, if Tori Kane hadn't hit the fog like a bold Scottish freight train about 6 months ago. But there's something else I haven't even started to talk about yet, and it's one of the first things to get people really excited about Orela. She's Dead by Daylight's first confirmed transgender character. It's not a huge part of her story. Orela's story isn't just about being trans or anything, but it's mentioned in the lore and in a couple of descriptions for cosmetics. I don't have really too much to say about this beyond just... hell yeah, man! It rocks to finally have a canon trans character in DBD. It's been way too long that we've been stuck with a licensed character and an allegorically trans murder robot as the closest thing DBD has to proper trans representation. It's a step forward for the game that is long overdue. And if you're going to try and get arsey with me in the comments about it because you've got a problem with trans people existing in media, then rest assured, I have nothing but contempt for you. The trans folks of the DBD world will always have a safe place in my community and an ally in me. And if you don't think that's acceptable, then by all means, please do fuck off. It'd make everyone's lives so much easier. But beyond just kind of being happy to see more trans representation in DBD, I kind of don't really know how to feel about Orela's transness in the story, because let's be honest, I don't exactly have much skin in the game. So I decided to ask someone who did to give their thoughts on Orela as trans representation. ScooteyBootey, the Dead by Daylight streamer and hardcore Wesker enthusiast, powered by her terrible internet and the unique cocktail of HRT and Ouroboros flowing through her veins. I asked her about her thoughts on Orela's lore, and she has some interesting stuff to say, so I'm going to leave you in her capable hands. I'm going to go paint some minis. See you guys in a bit.
Hi, I'm Scooty. I'm a Kaneki Wesker main, and well, that's not what I'm here for today. I want to talk about a character who means a lot to me. Orela. She's a character I genuinely enjoy, not just for her perks or her design, but just how well she's written. The way her being trans is incorporated into her story is perfect for me. See, to me what makes a trans character good isn't just that they are trans, it's how that part of them is used in the story. There's nuance involved. It's not just about representation for the sake of ticking a box, it's about creating a person with depth, with identity. It's there, it's present, but it's not the sole defining trait. Orela nails this. There's only one line in her lore that even mentions her transition. Freshman year, she bonded with Emily, a girl in her restaurant management class who helped her through her transition. That's it! A single line! But it speaks volumes! That one moment acknowledges her trans identity in a natural, grounded way. It doesn't overshadow the rest of her character, it allows for more things to happen. It's just a part of her history, it's a part of her life. It's the same way any other experience would be. And that's what I love. Her identity is respected, it's woven in with care, it's not waved around as a focal point or token or anything random. And there's the small stuff, like in her cosmetic, there's a little bracelet that she has that has the trans flag on it. It's subtle, it's sweet, it's not in your face, it's just a small detail that shows that there's a level of thought and care. That's the kind of representation I want to see more of. I want a character to feel more real. I want them to have their identity not be all the character is.
It's clear that Behaviour wanted Orela's transness to feel right, to feel authentic, and it's reflected in her voice work, which has been confirmed to be the voice of Angelica Ross. Angelica Ross is a prominent trans actress and advocate for trans rights, known for her work on American Horror Story, Danger and Eggs, and Dead End Paranormal Park for Netflix. The voice she uses for Orela fits brilliantly with the character, to the point I wouldn't be surprised if the character was written, at least on some level, with Angelica's voice in mind. A lot of characters eventually designed to be acted will be written with the expectation of a particular actor playing them, and Orela aligned just a bit too closely with Angelica herself for it to be entirely coincidental, I think. That's by no means a bad thing. I generally really love what Angelica does for the character. She feels very authentic as she keeps calm in a crisis, which is a critical trait for an experienced EMT. Loyalty to the established character is important when she's one of our few voiced original survivors. But unfortunately the voice work might be the big reason I would probably be playing much Orela going forwards. And that's not the voice acting's fault, it's the lines Angelica was fed. Holy fuck, some of these are atrocious. If I have to hear this every time I spawn in...
Let's avoid the hooks and hit those generators.
I'll have to find my dice bag so I can roll 4d6 to determine the psychic damage I was just dealt. It's quite frustrating to see such a talented voice actress kind of being fed garbage, especially after Kaneki just dropped, where the original Japanese voice actor came back to voice the character again, but he's mostly wasted too, because 90% of his lines are just Kaneki trying to pass a kidney stone. It's a crying shame after we've gotten some of our all-time great voice performances in the past year and a half or so. Brad Dourif and Jennifer Tilly as Chucky and Tiffany, Matthew Peretta as Alan Wake, Zoe Alexandria as the Unknown, Matt Mercer as Vecna, Nick Cage as, Nick Cage, and most recently and kick-assingly, Deborah Wilson as the Houndmaster. DBD has been pairing some great voice actors and voice writing lately, so it's sad to see Angelica Ross kind of wasted on these cornball jokes and cheesy puns. And it's not even like Sable, whose voice lines are allowed to be cornball and cheesy because the character is cornball and cheesy. It feels so out of place for a character as grounded as Orela. It's the only real tarnish I can find on a character who's so roundly a success otherwise, and who makes me really excited to see the future of DBD's original survivors. I love DBD's original characters. It's not to say I love all of them, mind you. I have my characters whose stories I love to hate, but even in the worst cases, I can usually at least see what they're going for, or can enjoy it when behaviour takes a big swing with a character idea, even if the implementation's rusty. And Orela is anything but rusty. It hurts that in the big 2025, shipping a black trans character portrayed by a prominent black trans activist as a solo release is a financial risk. It shouldn't be, but that's the brutal reality of the climate that we're in right now. I am very pleased to say the character we wound up with was worth that risk, and it makes me happy to see that she's generally been received very well. There's obviously some people being bigoted shits, that was kind of unavoidable, but honestly it's way fewer than I expected. And after getting Houndmaster, Tori, and now Orela in relatively quick succession, it makes me excited for a post-FNAF world where DBD gets out of their licensed phase and starts making more fantastic original content again. High quality originals are the heart and soul of Dead by Daylight, and if Orela is a sign of things to come, an indication of what the future holds for original survivors going forwards, suffice to say, I'm seated and anticipating what's to come. That's all I had to say about Orela Rose. Thanks again to Scooty for giving her 2 cents in this video. Links to her Twitch and Twitter and all that jazz are in the description, so please go take a look. She is absolutely fantastic and is working on some pretty cool stuff that I think you all should go take a look at. Speaking of cool stuff, Orela coming out means that the last content update for Dead by Daylight is now out and the anniversary livestream is fast approaching. I got so much shit on my plate right now. I've got my year in review, I've got my lore builds for every killer, I've got a bunch of other lore stuff I'm doing in preparation for the FNAF Kids' arrival. It's really an exciting time, so if you want to catch up to that, then please do subscribe, take a look at some of my older videos, and my wonderful patrons get to see this stuff early, so yeah, if you want to sign up to the Patreon, then the link to that is in the description too. Right, guess I'll see you around. Oh yeah, and the merchant design preview number 2 is coming soon, so that'll be fun, right?